Hello, my name is Jill Cox-Cordova, and this is the Do Something Different interview. Today's guest is Devorah Major, who's quite the prolific writer. She's written 6 books of poetry, 2 novels, 2 biographies, and a slew of essays and individual poems. She was also San Francisco's 3rd Poet Laureate. I found her to be quite a wise woman, and I bet you will too. This is my interview with Devorah Major. So before 2020, what genre and themes did you mostly focus on as a writer?
I do poetry and fiction. I probably was doing more poetry than fiction. And I think the themes I have, I tend to write with family, although I also write sci-fi and speculative fiction. But still, much of that is around ideas of family and community.
I see. And now in 2020, what are you working on?
Well, in 2020, I actually have picked back up a project that I had just kind of back shelved that I had been my father's caretaker for a few years. He's been gone now since 9 years now. But before that, I recorded a dozen tapes that we would just sit, we would eat and drink wine and just talk. So I just kind of asked him random questions that came up. And I started transcribing the tapes and redacting little articles, and I kind of put it down. But on rereading some of what I had already done and looked at it, I picked it back up this year, and I'm much more aggressively pursuing it because I realized there's certain lessons, I would say, that I really hadn't picked up on before that I'm more conscious of in these times.
Lessons like what?
Well, I would say the biggest one is to keep on the road, persevering in a particular way that isn't kind of trying to beat down walls, because a wall is a wall. And if you don't have a sledgehammer, it's not going to fall. But rather that kind of thing of asserting this is who I will be despite, this is who I am, this is how I'm going to operate in the world, and this is how I'm going to move towards the changes I want. And to really stay true to that and not get kind of pulled.
So what in your transcripts did your father say that made you learn that particular lesson?
Well, I have to say, one of the questions that really struck me was I was asking him, what was he proud of in his life? What did he accomplish? And I had to say, my father, I thought he would say things like, I'm based in San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, I grew up in San Francisco. So he was the head of NAACP that was so radical, the National wanted to put him out. But they set up deseg law for the schools that San Francisco still operates under. Opened up auto row, so now you can go to auto stores, particularly luxury like Cadillac and like that, and they're black salespeople. Got the first black fireman. I'm waiting for all of this. And he said, it wasn't just me. Me and my age mates, we refused to be called a boy anymore. And we did it in different ways. We didn't discuss it. We didn't organize it. But one person in the office would stand up, and then another one would. And he talked about it. He talked about this one person in his office, man who was, let's say, a little more modest in his approach to Anglos. But when my father insisted, no, I am a man, I have a wife, I have children, I will be called a man. This man stood up too. Not as forcefully, but he stood up too, which then, and my father said that's what he was most proud of, being a part of this almost underground standing up of men saying, we are men, we'll be called men. Now, to be fair, we were in the North. So I do think, I know, in fact, for a fact that it happened in the South too, but not as large because they had a different stranglehold on the population. Maybe we need to listen to each other, both ways generationally.
Yes, yes.
I find myself listening to my grandson who just turned 21 quite a bit because he's 21. And I was there, but I was there during the Black arts movement and the Black nationalism struggles, and it was a very different time to be Black in.
So do you think that because of all those experiences and the childhood you had because of your father, do you think that's why you became a writer? Because you had so many stories to tell.
I became a writer because that's what I was supposed to do. I did not set out to be a writer. I trained in dance and theater, seriously trained. I performed in dance and theater into my mid-20s. I was thinking about, maybe, did I want to go to LA? Did I want to go to New York? That's the path I was on. And other people started calling me a poet. And so I had all this theater, so I would perform my poems and do all this because I brought that background with me and the dance. And after a while, it came to me that that dance, theater, performing was just a vector for me to get to writing. So what did my father have an impact? Absolutely. I mean, I wrote a couple of little kid stories with him. I mean, I was the little kid, but it featured a child, a girl. How do you like that? But I think the writing came, it was given to me.
How has that determined what you plan to do from now on?
I'm one that if I can go around the mountain, I'm not necessarily going to climb up the mountain because it's hard to climb a mountain. And I think that I'm more realizing that there's certain views you can't get if you don't climb the mountain. And so I think I'm a little bit more pressing those edges a little bit further and definitely taking more chances. I noticed I used to have a very thick, rich, metaphor-rich poetry. And I noticed this year, everything I've been writing has been much more simple, much clearer, much more pointed. And it's not like I said, oh, I think I'm going to change my poetry. It's just that I think I want to be understood in ways that one of my favorite poets that I constantly learn from is Lucille Clifton. And she writes with that kind of sparseness, and I think I understand it better, that it's this, you being clear, being clean, not being bound by, if you don't know the history of this event, you won't understand this poem.
Yes.
So if I do a poem about the Atlanta child murders, well, those were decades ago. And so most people don't know about them anymore. So I can't just do it that way. However, I can do a poem about children being killed, even possibly by law enforcement, which is one of the major theories of that passing, so that I can look at the heart of it. And I would say that that's how things have changed, trying to go more to the heart. And I'm working on a piece that's going to take me a while to get to. What I did was I just looked up pandemics. So the first one I found was a BC pandemic. Mm-hmm. And then I went on up, and so many of them came out of wars. They were spread by soldiers coming home or traveling through war, which I find fascinating, mm-hmm. including the 1918 flu they're talking about, that they compare to this one. And we've survived them and we've grown. And so I think that there's this again. I do think that there's a lesson here that we had SARS and Ebola, and it's like, are they speeding up? Yes, they are. So I think that there is a way in which we need to acknowledge Mother Earth, that we need to acknowledge that we are not taking care of the gardens and the seas and such as we should. And so these diseases are coming out, but we can. And the fact that we've cleared the air all over the world, like in these huge measurable amounts in a number of months. The fact that, yes, there's a lot of, putting aside the sickness and death, not to ignore it, but that's pandemic. There is some ugliness, there certainly is, but racism was on the rise anyway. I think that's what's happened is Asians have become a bigger target for it, which will bring that to more empathy with each other, empathy hopefully in terms of Africans on the globe in our struggle, because it's not just an African-American struggle, but that there are ways in which we're joining together. I know that before pandemic. I did water aerobics. That was the way I kept in shape. And just because of the politics, I found women that I was pretty sure were not even close to where I was politically, Anglos, started talking to me and started talking about how we needed to be kind to one another. And
Oh,
all of this ugliness and division was wrong, and this hate being preached was wrong. And I was like, wow. And I think these people, even in these times, they're out there. And these were people that, frankly, they're not in my circles. We don't listen to the same music. We don't watch the same art. We probably don't eat many of the same foods. But the point was that idea of connection. And I think that these are opportunities to really make them stronger and understand that we, the people, have the power if we take it. But it requires we be kind with one another.